Is that on? No.
Check, check.
Should I just start?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming back in. And we'll do some opening comments as people are coming into the area. In case you don't know me, I'm Dale Moore, and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees. I just went on the trustees this year, and they voted me the chair, so I don't know how that happened. Anyway, we have a great group of trustees. I'd like to introduce them. Dave Lampka is our vice chair. You can just kind of wave your arms. Dale Wolf is our secretary. We have Brian Azelborn. I think he's up in the booth. Ed Holstrom. Marilyn Lodge. You'll hear from Marilyn today. Steve Schroeder. Steve's going to try to keep us on time because we got an hour and a half and we can bleed over a little bit if we need to. Tom Sears and Lauren Weber. That's our Board of Trustees. The trustees don't invent every project, as you will see today. Many of these have bubbled up from different committees. You have an agenda, hopefully. If you don't have an agenda, it looks like this. Wave your hand, and somebody will come running and giving you one. There's two parts to the agenda. The bottom half of the sheet is what we're going to actually talk about. The top half of the sheet deals with our mission, our vision statement, and our missional priorities. And I'd have you focus just real briefly on missional priority number 5, which has to do with facility projects for ministry and mission. So all 6 of the initiatives we're going to talk about today are really focused on those 3 areas under missional priority number 5. So the other sheet that you have should look like this, and that's a feedback sheet. We really need you to fill that out and leave it behind, because that's going to tell us what kind of level of support the congregation has for each of these 6 initiatives. And then that'll give us some direction on what next steps to follow. So I really encourage you to fill that out. And we're going to get started real quickly here. So before we start, I'd like to have Pastor Jonathan come up and say a few comments and offer a prayer.
Thank you all for being here today. Just a couple of comments I want to start with. To discuss physical spaces, as we are going to do here today, should and must be a conversation about our mission and our ministry in the world. In fact, as Dale just noted, we've named this conversation and the work coming out of this as a missional priority, because the things we do with our physical spaces need to have a direct connection to and impact upon how we make room for the stranger, love the neighbor, live out our call to discipleship. These are important conversations, and I ask you to keep that question of mission and calling to this community in mind as you consider the options before you today. The other brief comment I'd share is this. It's important for us to listen to one another as we seek to discern the things that are right and good for us to do now. I trust God will guide us into wisdom today and in the days that are still to come, if we will keep our calling in mind and if we will commit to listening well to one another, believing that through each other we just might hear the voice of God speaking to us. Let us pray. God of every good and perfect gift, thank you for the work that has been done to bring us to this moment. Thank you that we can have these conversations today. Help us decide together the things you would have us do so we can be all that you desire for us to be. Amen.
Thank you. High tech, low tech. The first project is the renovation of the Wesley Center, the kitchen, and some supporting spaces. When we did the Forward in Faith, it's been about 6 years ago when that finished. That was one of the biggest comments. Why aren't we doing the Wesley Center and the kitchen? Well, we just didn't have the money. Now is the time to do that. And so this really bubbled up from a lot of ministry areas, the women worship area, sending to serve, etc. Maryland Lodge has led a team of people to work on the planning. And we hired our architect again, Newman Munson. And we have Nathan Griffith here today. And so Marilyn's going to kick us off and talk about the project. And then Nathan will lead us through the schematic design that Newman Munson has prepared.
Thanks, Dale. Good morning. I'm so excited to be able to present to you the proposed plans for the remodeling of the Wesley Center and the big kitchen. As we know, those areas are currently used by many groups, but are not very welcoming or user-friendly anymore, and we hope to change that. The Wesley Center is used by both church and community groups such as Neighborhood Meals and the Interfaith Alliance, Holiday Fair, Salad Luncheon, Christmas meals, funeral luncheons, and congregational celebrations are all in this space. We want to give it a total facelift to make it welcome, airy, and open, with the beautiful stained glass windows that match these, visible from top to bottom, not just from the bottom third. We want to change the focus to the outside wall of the Wesley Center so that folks entering don't feel that they are disrupting the event taking place. The plans call for easy use of space to configure whatever front of house event might be taking place, from worship to music to fellowship or even a play. This will be an inclusive space for all types of activities. We feel that the plans that you will see accomplish all that and more. The big kitchen is not as usable as it once was. We propose to enlarge it and change the configuration so that all composting of meals can be done inside the walls instead of out in the open in the Wesley Center. We plan to reuse several elements to save money, but are hopeful that all who cook meals or prep foods will be able to better enjoy better flow and storage of equipment. Currently, the dishwasher is on its last legs. It needs replacing due to parts that are not available anymore to repair it. Those who use the big kitchen prepare food need this space. It will become much easier to work together to prepare food for the many facets of church and community fellowship with this renovation. The hallway area would have minor electrical and cosmetic updates. There are two options for the bathrooms. One is to refresh the existing rooms, and the other is to gut and build new like those on the main floor. All of these changes will give St. Paul's a new burst of energy and will be welcoming for both members and visitors alike. To lead you through the meat of the changes, I would like to introduce Nathan Griffith, architect from Newman Munson Architects.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. And thank you for everybody for being so welcoming to me and my son, Leo, who's over there. The minute he had heard the word donut, we ran out and he grabbed a donut. And so, and I was very surprised by the description that Marilyn had given. I didn't know it was going to be so into the details. But let me try and walk you through what I know about the project, and we'll go from there. All right. So we have an overall plan of the lower level right below where we are today. And if you can see, there's a light gray kind of tone over a lot of the rooms in the plan. Those areas we are not touching in the renovation. Now the areas that do not have the gray tone, those white areas, the Wesley Center. Ooh, you can go back one here just a second. Oh, it didn't work too well on the screen. So the Wesley Center with all the tables, which are the circles there, the hallway and the bathrooms. Go forward one. And as well as the big kitchen. Those are the primary areas that we'll be touching, as well as the restrooms outside of there. So I'm going to talk about each one of those spaces specifically. And so we can go forward. And so this is a plan of the Wesley Center. Now, there's a couple goals, large, high-level goals with the renovation of this space. The major one is to flip the space, to flip the function of the space so that when you walk in, you walk into the back of the room from the hallway. And then you see the activity that might be happening against the exterior wall sort of in front of you. And so what we have here is a bunch of round circles with tables showing that we can get the capacity of seating we need for the different events that you have in that space. But then beyond that, straight ahead, there'll be some screens happening or sort of recessed into the ceiling that can drop down for presentations, as well as room for setting up for a contemporary service or anything like that. We've got places along the perimeter wall to hang paraments for the service. We're also showing room for a mobile stage that can be stored primarily most of the time in the storage room, but then rolled out for performances in that area. If you're walking in at the beginning or towards the beginning of a service, you might hang your coat there on the very left side. It's very small text that says coat hooks and bench, a place to put your purse or your coat or an object you might have inside the room, and then go find a seat and enjoy the service. After, you may stroll along the new serving counter area on the right side of the image there. We're completely recreating that serving counter and moving that wall actually and growing the big kitchen, making the big kitchen even bigger. Another change in this space is the sound booth. If you recall, the sound booth currently is against the exterior wall, is quite large. We no longer need it to be that size. And so we're able to pull that to the back of the room with a very small little closet with the equipment there against the hallway. And when there's a service or something, that equipment can be pulled out and used and set up or then pushed back into that closet. And so those are the primary functions of that space. I also failed to mention the storage room on the left will also grow just slightly. That wall, we'll rebuild that wall into sort of the middle of the space and growing the storage area. I did want to point out here as well on the kitchen side, the serving counter, there's also a new dish return there against the exterior wall. I wish my pointer could work because I see some of you sort of squinting. But what I want to talk about then is the kitchen. So before we do that, I forgot I have an image of the Wesley Center. And so here's an image that shows the architecture of the space and what that might feel like. And so one primary goal, as Marilyn had mentioned, is we want to see those stained glass windows on the exterior. When you walk into the room, you can't see them. You see the bottom 2/3 or bottom half of the windows. And that's something that's very special and unique to the space. And so the way we're achieving that is by raising the ceiling. And so as the ceiling steps towards the exterior wall, it will raise up about 12 inches or 18 inches a couple times. And so what you're seeing in this image is a few steps in the ceiling, and that gives us an opportunity to hide projectors and other things in that stepped ceiling. And in fact, that's a lot closer to what the ceiling used to be originally in the space. It was raised up, it was a plaster ceiling that raised up towards the perimeter so you could see all of those stained glass windows. How is my pace? Is my pace good? All right. Let's keep going. We'll talk about the kitchen. And now I'm wishing that was a whole lot bigger for you. So let's start on the Wesley Center side. We get a very long serving counter, the same length that we have today, but we can update that with cabinets below, new countertop, new coiling door that will come down on a push of a button, and then cabinets on the back side as well for all the storage in that kitchen area. Then to the right of that, I had pointed out a new dish return area, so you no longer have to go into the hallway to return your dishes. The function makes a lot more sense then. As you were to walk in the door, there'd be a double swing door into the kitchen next to the dish return, and there to your right would be that new ventless dishwasher and kind of new stainless steel counters and sinks things there, soil counter for cleaning of the dishes. Along the back side of the exterior wall, we're going to try and reuse a lot of what you have further along there. There's an existing sink, a couple existing sinks and counter and cabinets below that. We'll try and reuse as much as we can, refacing the cabinet doors to match the rest of the finishes of the kitchen. In the middle of the space, we'll have plenty of room for the rolling tables that we have now, and so all of those will get reused, but we have additional room to create a new stationary counter that you see back, kind of horizontal bar there that's closer to the back wall. Now, another thing that we're changing is the hood, the cooking hood. The hood that's there now is very old and doesn't quite work as well, exhausting those fumes and things when needed. And so we're having to recreate a hood on the back wall, which will be the new cooking area, as well as next to and around the corner storage of food with refrigerators and things like that. The old dish room then is now going to be a storage room for dry goods and things. And so you see that sort of rectangular room. Ooh, somebody has a pointer going on up there. Right where that red pointer is the old kind of dish room, which will now be a storage room. And I believe we have an image of this room. The next slide. And so here we are standing, looking at the exterior wall. You see then the serving counter on the right, which will be repurposed cabinets that are refaced, existing cabinets with a new countertop there and a new coiling door. And then to the left, some refrigerators in the foreground and cooking station there in the back with a new hood. And then right in front of us, front and center, is that new island with new dish storage carts that can be stored under the island as well. Let's keep right on going. And another part of this project that Marilyn had mentioned is the hallway. And so we want to refresh the hallway and get that to match some of the other hallways that we have in the lower level. And so that'll entail putting in new flooring, new ceiling, and painting the hallway. We had a request for outlets up high for lighting that's put in parts of the year. And so we'll have those outlets up high. The existing connection center will remain. And we're able to then recreate either a bench or a coat rack. We had talked about, there's a little nook there that likely will turn into a bench in that area. As a part of this project as well are the restrooms. And so I'm going to show you a couple options. We have two options for the restrooms. This one is the more minimal touch, light touch renovation of the restrooms. And really it's some maintenance items and a bit of upgrading. The vanities really need to be redone in both of those restrooms. They're quite old and they just need to be replaced. All of the stalls would have grab bars added to them to be more accessible. But other than that, we'd be providing a new ceiling, new lighting, and painting those restrooms. And that's the base option, that light touch option. I wanted to show you another option we have for you. So there on the left is an enlarged floor plan of the existing restrooms. Now the existing restrooms aren't really accessible. A typical accessible restroom has a stall in the back that's a much larger stall with a 5-foot turning radius so that somebody who needs it has the room to use the stall. And we don't have that now. And if we were going to try and accomplish that with the current layout, it becomes much more challenging with that layout. We would likely have to take out one of the stools and then encroach in on some of the sink and circulation space. It just really doesn't work very well. By the time we do that, it makes sense to think about what should we be doing with the layout. And so that second option is to match the restroom layout that we have upstairs as well as the finishes. And that's the right way to do it, to incorporate the accessible space that we need, in front of the vanity and in that back stall area. We would also incorporate a new drinking fountain too. I believe that's the last of the set. Oh, there we go. And of course, let's not forget costs. We worked with Rennerneck Associates, who was the general contractor of the major project here a handful of years ago. We engaged them again for this project, and they help us put together an estimate for the work. So the baseline construction cost would be $1,030,000. There's some costs that are added to that total a sort of project cost, and those costs are equipment, primarily the kitchen equipment, and I had mentioned some of the new equipment that you'd be getting. That's $136,000 for the equipment. There's also additional costs for asbestos abatement with the flooring. There's some asbestos in the flooring, likely in the Wesley Center in the kitchen. Design fee, R fee, and insurance for the project would be $133,000. It's always good to include a contingency with this work as well. With any renovation project, you'll have surprises, things will happen during construction, and we haven't even fully fleshed out the design yet and picked out specific finishes and things like that. And so it's good that you hold a contingency in your budget. That's $100,000. And so total cost with contingencies is $1,366,000. And I had talked about that additional restroom work. And so to get new restrooms like the ones that you have upstairs, you would add $196,000 to that. Oh, is this the old one? There, Dale and I were updating slides frantically here before I was leaving work. He had just mentioned to me that the total cost with contingencies is the wrong number. If you were to add those up, it's $1,399,000. Right, $1,399,000. Sorry about that. Okay. We do have that version if you want to stay for the second presentation here in about 90 minutes. Okay. And so I think we transition to the next project. Or did you want to say something?
I think we got some time for Q&A.
Okay, yeah, sure. Does anybody, who has the first question?
Oh, there's a second mic. Okay, didn't know that.
Mine's just really easy. How many people will the renovated fellowship hall hold?
The Wesley Center area?
Yeah, the Wesley Center.
No less than we'd have today. No less than we'd have today.
We did a lot of renovations to the sanctuary, and that was kind of our face forward to the community. People could see this, it's beautiful. The second biggest space in our church area that's visible to the community is the Wesley Center and the kitchen down there, because that's where people come in. So I think it needs to be updated just because of that.
Question back over here.
Look at him, he keeps
And
saying,
Pastor Jonathan has to jog around.
That's right. I needed this.
Yes.
I really like the renovation. I just have one question. In the Wesley Center in the back part, we tend to store like chairs and other stuff. Will there be additional places where things could be stored if not being utilized?
Great question. As I had mentioned, that storage room will grow slightly, and so you have more room in that area to store things. Because the wall moves. Yeah.
I get the need for reversing it for people coming in the front. My concern is, and I think it's a beautiful plan, but my concern is visibility. I mean, if we reverse this, here we're focused on the front, and that's why the stage, I think, was put where it is down there. It's because of this. If we reverse it and people are spread out in the front row, and there's only a little back row, it just seems like visibility for a play or whatever is going on the stage is not going to be as visible to people on the side. Have you thought about that?
We had talked about that, and that is one deficiency. When we switch the room, when we make the back of the room the front of the room, we can't change the shape of the room, and so we have trade-offs. I'm not as concerned, though, given the proximity of the portable stage would help. You're mentioning that it will be a little higher. Is that what you're thinking? So having the portable stage a little bit higher would allow folks to see, but given the size of the room, I'm not as concerned with the distance that somebody might be away from the stage. In much larger room, we would be concerned. So, 15 foot by 15 foot is the square we showed in the plan. I mean, nothing's been purchased or anything like that, and so if we needed a bigger one or a smaller one.
What was that number?
The stage?
No, I'm sorry, on what it's going to cost. We kind of mumbled through that.
So the total cost.
I can't read that from here.
So the total cost with contingencies would be $1,399,000. So about $1.4 million. If we want to do the restrooms with that, we would add $196,000. Yeah, Dale had mentioned 1.4 to 1.6.
Just one more. And this is more just a comment, just to kind of voice for Quinn, since he is not here. Obviously, the accessible restrooms would certainly help him and those like him coming to our congregation and to the church.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan and Marilyn, and the committee that worked on that. Again, please fill out your feedback sheets. We really need your feedback. Incidentally, in 2007, there was another committee in St. Paul's who came to the same conclusion about reversing the Wesley Center, but that project never actually happened. Okay, let's move on to the next project, and that is a reconfiguration of the sanctuary chancel area, the area I'm standing on right now. And this is an initiative that came through the worship committee. And so John Nolsch is going to speak or sing, I don't know which, and tell us about the vision for this project. And then Nathan's going to come back up and show you some very preliminary designs.
Actually, there are three really good reasons for this, and only one of them came from the Worship Work Area Committee, so I'll start with that one. And that is that if we have no different levels and everything is down on this level, that will make this whole chancel area much more flexible for different forms of worship. Dance is the one that comes to my mind right away. This obviously is an impediment to doing different kinds of dances, and that's a very cool form of worship that we don't do a whole lot here, but could. The other is for the music ministry program. It allows for much bigger projects, including projects where we would cooperate with other churches, as we've done some during Holy Week and other times around Christmas time or Advent. It is awkward even for our own groups to configure when we have immobile levels. I don't think our committee has any concern about portable levels. If there's a need, for instance, this is a really tall table, and if there had to be a need for a level for people to stand on here, as long as it's portable, not a problem. Same thing with there's no way to make this pulpit handicap accessible for people using wheelchairs. And we love this, and nobody in the committee wants to do anything to take this away. But if there needs to be a little bit of a platform underneath it, as long as it's much more mobile than it is right now, the committee would love to have more flexibility. The whole issue really is flexibility when it comes to the ability to do different kinds of worship here. I know one person had a concern when I talked about this earlier that people in the first rows would have a harder time seeing a person in the pulpit if the pulpit was lower. And I'm not a real science guy. You probably know that I'm more of a social sciences kind of guy. But I think the science would say that the higher you move a pulpit like this up, the more likely a person who's not terribly tall will be obscured by the front of the pulpit. So I don't think people in the front row are really going to have a huge problem with the pulpit being a little bit lower if it needs to be lower. Again, I don't think the committee has any problem with the pulpit being on some sort of a riser of sorts. Stairs can still be handled back here if there's a need for the pulpit to be higher. There are members of the committee here. Is there anything that I missed? The whole idea is to have everything flat, to have hardwood all the way up, and I imagine the architect will say something about this, hardwood all the way up to the back here. This white would go all the way down. Actually, it already is all the way down. Everything that you see in between the two white walls would be the same that you see here, only it'll just be lower. The problem in the choir loft area is that last time we had a renovation, we put a bamboo floor down here. Not completely sure why we did that. Maybe.
It's supposed to be really hard. I came right after you did it, and it was supposed to be really hard and not gouge, but every time you move anything, it gouged, and yeah. It's okay.
So the proposal would include taking out that so everything is flat here. The pianos will no longer have to bounce off of the bamboo or bounce up onto the bamboo. Same thing with, this is a very heavy table. Anyone that's tried to move it knows that. And we have to more or less bounce this down too. We try our best not to bounce it, but it's humans doing it. And it's really heavy. And so if this was just on the hardwood floor and we could just wheel it out, that'd be wonderful. If the pulpit was on wheels and we could just wheel it out, that would be wonderful. There is a proposal that the organ be able to be moved. The cables and all sorts of things for the organ are in here. And so if the organ is moved for like a concert or something out here, then you have cables blocking an egress door. And so the proposal, I believe, does include having cables here, but also having cables somewhere over here so we could hook up the organ and we could have a concert there. That goes to the next thing that we didn't so much talk about in the worship work area, and that's different stuff that's not necessarily worship that could use our space. Probably some of you know Harmony Hawks are now using this for their performances, and they have risers, and so they would love to just put up their risers rather than having to deal with our different levels up here. They do pay us, and I don't know how much that is, but there's all sorts of other opportunities for concerts and things that aren't necessarily strictly Christian religious worship services that we could use this space. We obviously would be careful in who would use it. We wouldn't probably rent it out to somebody who's promoting devil worship, say. But there are many, many ways that we could use this and actually have a little source of funding for us if we were able to. Plus, I know Michael is thinking about bringing in pretty famous people. Do you know who he's thinking of bringing in this spring? He mentioned something, and he's listening to us right now, but he can't give us input right now. But I do remember once we absolutely totally filled this room with people who were listening to the Moscow Boys Choir when Mark Babcock was here, and performers like that would much, much prefer just a flat space that they could be flexible with and do with what they want, rather than a space that we have like here that just cannot be moved. So that's the number 2 reason. Different worship experiences, different opportunities for different people to use our space, and that space, if it's being used by the community will have a chance to come into St. Paul's Church, take a look at our information. I'm sure we'll have some people here inviting them in, and it could give us a little bit more presence in the community and maybe even get us to have more members. We don't know this, but it's possible. The last reason that we should probably have this all be flat is because of accessibility and welcoming. People who use wheelchairs, they don't necessarily see this nice high level up here. They see barriers. I know Quinn was mentioned earlier by his dad, and we did successfully find a way to get Quinn to be able to light candles, which is something that every kid, certainly me, I loved to play with fire when I was a kid. Everyone would like to have the chance to do. And we found a ramp that we were able to use for Quinn, and because he has a power wheelchair, that worked out. It definitely wasn't code. Code is 1 to 12, and it wasn't anywhere near that. Some members of church did go out to see a church that had a raised chancel and did have by the code ramp, and they had to actually do a spiral around the chancel to be able to get it appropriate for code. So if we want to be welcoming, if we want possibly to have a little extra income in here, if we want to have flexibility in our ability to do different kinds of worship experiences, we need a flat chancel.
Why, thank you, John. All right, accessibility, flexibility. We don't have wood flooring under the current chancel. We've checked, and so we know that we'll need to demolish all of this and reinstall wood flooring. There's a bit of structural investigation that we'll need to do that we've incorporated as a part of the project. It will reveal some of the back wall, and the plaster does go down, the woodwork does not, and so we'll have to do some installation of new woodwork down below to the floor. Those are the nuts and bolts of this area. And John had mentioned the replacement of the bamboo floor over here and getting that floor to be flush with the wood floor with no transition so that we can move things back and forth very easily. That should not be very difficult. I don't anticipate any structural work over there as well. So fairly simple from my standpoint. From my standpoint. I believe there's another slide here. And just a few graphics. This is a floor plan showing, communicating to our partners, Rinderneck, who helped us price this project, what we would need to do with the dash lines indicating the things that would need to be demolished, moving the organ over, and things like that. Yep. We talked about power and receptacles and electronics on the back wall, as well as data connections. All of that would be incorporated in the project. Does anybody have any questions? Actually, let me talk about the cost, I think is the next slide. And so this project, construction and fees would be $85,000. And again, we want to hold a contingency for any surprises that we might have. In this case would be 10% or $8,500. And so cost and contingencies, $90,000 to $100,000 for this project. Who has the first question? And the microphone.
Yeah, certainly enough.
At one point, I think we were talking about changing the choir loft itself. Does that stay the same, or does that also change?
The loft itself does not change as part of this project.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that price include the flooring change in the choir loft?
It does.
It's just the bamboo floor.
We used to have a railing around there and a place to kneel. Would that still be possible, or would we have that?
We talked about the incorporation of mobile kneelers along there.
Yes. Okay.
So we could incorporate mobile.
At one point, didn't we discuss the ability to use our current rails, but put those into the floor as opposed to in this first level?
Yes, yes. So what he's talking about, there are holes up here that allow us to install the
Like
rails.
the ones on the side have.
What's that?
Like these small little pieces. This is not the full set of rails, but on the sides of the chancel.
These side, yes. Yeah, and those are mobile, and so we can move those how we need to. So again, accessibility and flexibility.
Can you go back a couple of slides where it shows the top-down part? Yes. So on the right, it looks like that's where the new, or where the organ will actually get transferred, so it'll actually be up against that back wall, or is it because it's mobile, we'll be able to kind of move it? So it's a blue stuff, it looks like, there right to the left of the doors coming in.
That's right. That is the outline of the organ, and because it needs to plug in, we can't move it anywhere. So we have to locate it somewhere back here. So here or there, two places. Okay. Two places.
Oh. All right, thank you.
Sharon, did I see your hand?
No, I would like to just second the thought about the altar, having an altar to kneel.
Is there any kind of a historic preservation element to getting rid of all of these levels?
We did check with SHPO, who guided us through our previous project and ultimately gave money to the organization, and they were good with these changes. So,
okay, is the
SHPO,
organ?
The State Historic Preservation Office. Yeah.
You've got the organ with the organist with their back to us. Is that going to be the way it has to be, or if they're doing an organ concert, I don't know that you want to see their back. You want to see their face.
Certainly doesn't
So
have to be that way.
it's something that could be turned around in that area.
Yeah, these are really
It's
very
a little
early on.
versatile.
So if we need to make sure, or turn it around, then let's get that update in the plan. Yeah.
Go here, then there.
Can you write that on your note card? There's a comment card. If anybody has comments about changes like that, just write them down, and then we'll filter them through to the group.
I appreciate hearing all those good reasons to change this. I've always thought it looks so nice, but I can understand that. What I'm wondering is, it sounds like sometimes, depending on what the event is, there may be some things coming in that are portable, or some things going out that are portable, and where, I can't picture where they would be stored and out of the way.
That is a good question. We're not creating a storage room as a part of this project, so I don't.
I'm assuming most of those are temporary changes, so I'm guessing like the table and the pulpit, as we do for Good Friday or other times, would just move to the parlor. I don't think any of these are long-term. If it's a special choir coming in or something like that, it would just move out and then
come back in.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw.
Okay, it's a comment, sorry, but having all of these different levels also makes visual art possibilities really limited. I've encountered that as a visual artist, things that just couldn't be done because of the limited space. And also, when we have all these levels and all this, it juts out so far, we tend to have, whenever we have groups come up to the front, they stand where you're standing, and everyone on the sides can't see them. So being able to be flat and be set more back actually makes more people be able to see. And the accessibility thing, we have to act on that. We need equality for anyone with a chair or other mobility issues.
Come over to Jane.
A music question. Will there be room for a grand piano? That was another thing we had talked about.
That was
I mean, the
something that
piano's
talked
not part
about,
of the
yes.
budget. There would
Right.
be.
Jane.
Thank you. I have to say I'm always torn when we talk about any changes to our sanctuary. So I've had mixed feelings about this, but I feel like I should remind people who were involved with when we got the $250,000 grant from the National Fund for Sacred Places a few years ago. It involved some training that Pastor Sherry and I went to, and one thing they stressed is the importance of if traditional churches, which they helped fund, they still do, if those are going to survive, they have to be more welcoming to their communities, and they need to figure out ways to invite others in for various reasons, but part of it including revenue, to add on to what John said. If we can make it easier for our community to share our spaces, and we can potentially benefit from that, that's what we need to do, because a lot of older traditional churches can't do that, and they're failing, they're dying. So I just thought I should mention that as a possible factor.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. One more.
Just a couple of comments and echoing what Jay just said, is there's a piece in there that says, oh, it's a sacred place, let's not mess things up. But one of my objections to a lot of new churches is they're just barns with projections of stained glass windows. And we do have a beautiful, beautiful space here that I feel very comfortable inviting people in for other purposes. Just the other comment, as being a liturgist frequently, this is a stepping hazard. There were several times going up multiple steps that I almost tripped. So flat floor sounds like a good idea.
Okay, no other handball person has brought this up, but we've had concerts in here before, and it's not easy to set up front when it's a handbell concert rather than being over there all the time. So this would aid in something like that.
I'm coming, Steve. Oh, gotcha. 1 minute, so. Anybody with a quick comment?
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, John. Oh. I guess not. Okay.
Did you want the microphone for that?
Not always.
Feel like we've opened something that maybe we should close.
I think we're having fun. Good. Thank you, Nathan. Thanks, John. Fill out those sheets because we need that information. Yes.
The sheets you were talking about on the back where it says 1 to 5 with 5 being most important. So we're doing each individual how important it is. We're not ranking. We're not saying one is more important than others. Is that
you might
correct?
you might think they're all 5s. You might think they're all 1s. So, or something in between. Yes. Good question. Okay, let's move on to the third item, which is sanctuary lighting and handicap access to the sanctuary. This one's less developed than these other two have been, so we'll just tell you the progress at this point. Last year, the trustees got a price to replace all the lighting in the sanctuary. I was not a part of that because I wasn't on the trustees. And that number to put in new lighting, not including what's called the theatrical lighting, that's those lights that are in the circles, the horizontal lights. But to replace all the lights was $90-some thousand. I don't remember the exact number, $92,000, $93,000. So that just kind of was tabled. And since then, we've been kind of working with the people up in the control booth. All these lights are run by controls. And the controls are done by a company named Sound Concepts. But they don't do electrical work. So the lighting is, as I've kind of discovered by working with the guys in the booth, is that it's really a combination of electrical work and control people. So we think there's another solution, but we haven't really worked it out, where we can repair what's broken with the lighting and upgrade some of the controls and do the lighting that way. So we don't really have anything to report on that other than it's a work in progress at this time. Handicap access to the sanctuary. It's easy to get folks, if they're willing to come in those doors, to set in the front pews, but there's really no section that's actually designed for a wheelchair, no place to put walkers really. And so we're going to be looking at some ways to do some things in the front to make it more accessible. We don't have a design for that yet. It wouldn't be a huge cost. We wouldn't need a capital campaign just for that. We also looked at doing something up in the corner sections, because that sounded kind of cool to me. And when we looked at it, it just can't be done the way the structure's built. It just doesn't work. So that leaves, how do we get people into the back? Those that would rather be in the back. And again, it would be fairly easy to take one or two of the back section pews out, make it part of the flat floor, and make it more inviting to be in the back, because you would actually be sitting with the congregation. That would be easy to do. But how do we get them back there? Currently, the only way to get people back there in a wheelchair is to come in these doors and go up the aisle. And John's correct, 1 in 12 is the code. These are about 1.67. So it takes a pretty strong person to get up that distance. Plus, it's further than 30 feet where you're supposed to have a resting point. So that's always possible. We could have attendants to do that. But have you ever had to leave a worship for one reason or another? maybe nature calls. Well, if you're in the back, you can't really leave. So what's been bubbling up is maybe we should look at re-implementing our elevator that's back in that corner, which has access from the outside. It actually has 4 stops. It has the entry. It can go to the lower level, which we really don't need. And then there's an intermediate level it goes to, and then it comes up to this level. So we've just started looking at that, and we've talked to our elevator company and sent them some pictures of what we have. They haven't looked at it in detail to determine what they could salvage, but kind of an order of magnitude number that they gave us, just so we'd have an idea, would be $150,000. So don't take that number to the bank, but it's just an order of magnitude. So what we would really be interested in your feedback is that something you'd be in favor for us to keep proceeding, knowing that that could be what the cost is? I know, I'm sorry? Well, the shaft is there, and they probably would reuse the cab. They actually haven't come out to look at it. Basically, this was kind of a conference call, so that's why it's pretty high level order of magnitude. So, but knowing that kind of number, we'd like to get some feedback on whether you think we should continue to proceed with that. Okay, so in summary, we've looked at 3 initiatives now: the Wesley Center, big kitchen, supporting space renovation, reconfiguring the chancel, including over into the organ space, and doing something with the lighting, and possibly re-implementing the elevator. If you add all those numbers together, I would suggest it would be somewhere between, and again, this would be using the larger number for the restrooms rather than the smaller number. You'd be probably in the order of magnitude of $1.9 to $2 million. And that would require a capital campaign, obviously. So just keep that number in your mind. Of course, if we just did the Wesley Center with the lesser expensive restrooms, that would be like $1.4 million. The one thing that we didn't say when we did the Wesley Center piece was that included kitchen equipment, but it didn't include new tables. If we wanted to get new tables, that would be an additional cost. That's correct, right? Okay. Okay, so just kind of a summary on that. So those projects would require a capital campaign, of course, approval by the congregation before we would proceed. So now we want to move on to what we call property initiatives. We have 3 of those. The first one is really I think kind of cool, but it comes with a cost, of course, as everything does. And that is what we call Ray's house. That's the house by the playground. The church acquired that from Ray Westrom in 2008, and we basically haven't used it. It was a storage space for quite some time. The storage has been all cleaned out of it. So Sending to Serve started thinking about using the missional priorities, low-cost housing, started thinking about what could they do with Ray's house. So they started working with Matthew 25 and the Catherine McCauley Center about a use for that house. And so I'm going to ask Kathy Colton, who is co-chairperson of Sending to Serve, to talk about the project. And then I might come up and tag team with her, and we'll get into the construction piece and the cost.
Great. Yeah, when he says that comes with a cost, the cost is a match to a donation of $40,000. So we're not talking hundreds of thousands or millions in this. This is very doable in my mind. Okay, I'm really excited to be here to share with you on behalf of Sending to Serve this plan that will bring beauty and meaning and life back to Ray's historic house. The Sending to Serve team began discussing the use of his house back in 2021 with a walkthrough, visioning, and brainstorming that summer. Wanting to be a good neighbor to those living in Wellington Heights and to live into our church's pilgrimage, mission, and action element number 3 of growing our spiritual faith and witness. Do you remember that? Back in 21, we were doing that. The team's big, audacious idea at that time was to renovate the historic home to serve Wellington Heights, offering professional counseling services, a networking center, or maybe leasing spaces to other nonprofit community partners. After the preliminary evaluation was presented by the Matthew 25 rehabilitation and construction staff, the estimated cost for the necessary renovations was beyond daunting to us. But we knew that that home could provide shelter, services, or respite for those living in the Wellington Heights neighborhood. Still, how could St. Paul's afford to bring that house back into a safe, livable condition? Other ideas began popping up. One idea was to move the house, but we asked about that and we were told that it would be very costly and very complicated with the structure as it is. We briefly contemplated the ideas of demolishing the house and selling the lot, or demolishing the house and keeping the lot and finding another use for it. These seem to be the cheapest, easiest, and most self-serving solutions for St. Paul's. But building a larger playground on the lot for our early learning center would fence our kids in and the neighbors out. Tearing down the house with the story of the architects Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright staying there just didn't seem like a good way to preserve history. Is St. Paul's wanting to be in relationship with folks in Wellington Heights? And if so, we wondered how could Ray's house be used for that purpose? The need for affordable housing and services for low-income families is great, as we all know. The backlash of the decades-old decision to put it in a parking lot where a house once stood on the 2nd Avenue side was still fresh in some of our minds. Considering all of this, we didn't feel that the demolition option modeled loving our neighbors. So we kept looking for other ways to make the restoration workable and affordable. Pastor Sherry, Pastor Jonathan, and the team brainstormed a possible partnership between Matthew 25 and the Catherine McCauley Center, as Dale said. The proposal that we have come up with now is that Matthew 25 would buy the house from St. Paul's for a very nominal price. They would then renovate the home and request that part of the cost be paid for by St. Paul's. We'll talk about the figures a little more specifically when I'm done here. Our church has an anonymous donor willing to put up $40,000 as a matching offer. Sending to Serve has approved using $8,500 to $11,000 per year for 6 years from the foundation funds that have been partially used in the past to support various mission partners. So every year we do this as Sending to Serve, giving that kind of, well, about double that amount to mission partners. So we would use part of that for 6 years, which is agreeable to Matthew 25. And that would cover the rest, essentially, of what we are expected to pay to Matthew 25. Then as owner and property, or manager of the property, Matthew 25 would renovate the house, possibly into 2 apartments. There are external entrances for 2 apartments, so it would work well that way. They would remove the garage, side additions, and sheds. A rear storage structure could be built with an arrangement made for St. Paul's to use that structure for storage. The Catherine McCauley Center has shown interest in working with Matthew 25 and could place 2 immigrant families there for transitional housing until permanent housing can be secured for them with the rent going to Matthew 25. For a couple weeks ago, then, Pastor Jonathan and I were asked to take a walk around the St. Paul's neighborhood with Eric Gutschmidt, a young property manager who I've been told is one of the few caring and responsible landlords in Wellington Heights. He took a lot of time to explain to us in many ways that Wellington Heights has many rental properties on the west side that are sitting empty or not being taken care of, with their owners seemingly waiting for a good offer from places like PCI, Mercy Hospital, or St. Paul's. The assumption is that those entities would tear down the homes and put in another medical building or a parking lot. With Ray's house looking as dilapidated as it currently does, the impression is that we don't plan on investing in our neighborhood, but rather are just waiting for the right time to bring in an excavator. That assumption, we were told, discourages other neighbors from investing in their homes here in Wellington Heights. This proposal supports many of our current GROW priorities. If there are immigrant families living there, we could invest in their lives through connections with our whole congregation. We could develop relationships, learning their self-interests, gifts, and needs, and working together to help bring them to a full and inclusive life in Cedar Rapids. We could welcome them to the neighborhood and church in a multitude of ways. United We March Forward could partner with them to provide various services. The Love in Action team is developing plans to organize people to work towards more just immigration policies and include these new neighbors in this effort. There are so many ways we can show support for Wellington Heights by making this place of historic value into a vessel of love and care for God's people, especially people who are struggling. Thank you. So Dale will tell a little bit more about specifics with, is there a slide to show that too, I think? Uh-huh.
Is this on?
No.
You can stay up here too.
I'll stay up here, yeah. Well.
Good now? Okay. Why don't you go back to the previous slide? Oh, that's a great slide. But you can see the front entrance, which goes to the lower level apartment. And maybe on the left-hand side, it's hard to see because we graded out. There's an entrance on a stairway, like Kathy said, that goes up to the apartment on the upper level. Kathy also mentioned, go back to the next slide. You see that single-story area with the big windows? That was an addition. When you hear about Ray's house being in really terrible condition, it's the additions that are in terrible condition. So they would be taken off, as Kathy said. Each floor has a kitchen, a living room, an eating area, and 2 bedrooms, and actually a porch. So they're quite sizable. There's a second addition entrance or exit to both apartments on the back side. It would be shared, but they'd have their own stairs. One would be a short flight of stairs to the first level, and a longer flight, which is already there, to the upper level. And the 2 units would be secured with doors, of course. So it's very doable. In terms of the existing structure is actually in pretty good shape when you get to the original footprint, but the rest of it is not. So go to the next slide. Yeah, this does turn out to be small, doesn't it? Matthew 25 works with some contractors and their experience, and has come up with the cost to renovate to do the demolition and to renovate. The outside includes Clint. I know Clint's in here somewhere. Where's he at? Oh, there he is. Okay. If I'm wrong, say something, please. I believe the outside, I was going to look this up last night, but I forgot to. I think it includes the new roofing, repairing the siding and painting, and possibly new windows. On the inside, it's really pretty much a total remodel on the inside. The walls are solid, but it needs total renovation. So the number they came up with was $346,500, plus again, you always got to add a contingency. And then if there was some outside work like a concrete pad, they put $15,000 in for that, or a total of $390,000. So the funding sources, Matthew 25 is working on 3 different grants. They have one of them, and I understand from Clint, one of them is probably pretty much a sure thing, and the third one they have to work a little harder on. But those grants would come to $176,000. And then Matthew 25 would take out a mortgage. And so how would the mortgage be paid? Well, when Catherine McCauley finds the tenants, the immigrants that would come as transitional housing, there would be a payment for their use of it, and that's where that money would be used to pay off the mortgage. And so what Matthew 25 is telling St. Paul's, that if the 390 number is correct, they're pretty much maxed out as their contributions, so they would need another $150,000. And then scroll to the bottom of the slide, and I think Kathy pretty much covered that. The donor that's come forward and the donor match, this would not be part of a capital campaign because the donor wants it to be a true match, meaning I'm given to this project. The number I was given for sending to serve was $50,000. It sounds like it could be bigger than that.
It could be, yeah. It could be more than that.
So that's why I said other if needed, recognizing you might not use all the contingency would be another $20,000. So.
Yeah, and that would come from sending to serve.
Okay. So that's a very interesting missional project. Question, do we have time for questions? I think we probably do. We can ask a few questions. Jonathan, you want to be the runner?
Is that a 1 minute or a question? Oh, we'll start here, then we'll come your way.
So just a clarification then, Matthew 25 would actually own and manage the property.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I think this is a wonderful project for the church, for the neighborhood. Has Catherine McCauley been asked about any upfront funding?
Yeah, this occurred even when Pastor Sherry was here, and she had the dialogue with them. I understand that they do not have sources to fund. We had thought, not we, the Sending to Serve had originally thought that there would be some, but I understand there would be none.
A lot of people and trustees have probably heard this before. And Kathy, I guess I was surprised that you said there were a lot of open houses already someplace within the neighborhood. I don't understand why we're not renovating or using those. That's one of the first things that I have. I was under the assumption way back when that we could not tear down Ray's house because it was historical district. Evidently that is not the case, and Dale did go out and find out what a cost would be if we just wanted to quote unquote tear it down. You have the physical part of that's $30,000. The mental part of that is, again, it's in a historic neighborhood. So yeah, we would probably get some black marks, maybe or something of that. And we own the place on 2nd Avenue, and one thing I didn't bring up in trustees before, we could possibly build a new house over there for a lot less money than this. I'm a financial steward of my money, and when I look at $390,000 to go off and do this, even though it's not quote-unquote all my money, government grant funds, all that stuff, there is our money. Sending to Serve is money that could have been used in other spots also. And so I don't think this is a good use of our financial resources that we have had.
Can I address the question about the homes? The homes that I was referring to are owned by people. They have landlords that own these. They just don't want to rent them out because they need to renovate them in order to rent them out. And so they're not homes that, are sitting there that we have anything or control over, but but they just think, well, I'm not going to put the money into it because I'd rather wait until somebody buys me out for a better price. So that's just a comment.
I just wanted to share, when I was in college, having no historic connection to Cedar Rapids or St. Paul's or anything about this area, but I was a geography major, and one of the classes I took my senior year was called Locational Conflict, and we had to write a paper about a locational conflict, and my professor had suggested that I take a look at St. Paul's and its relationship with Wellington Heights. So I came up here, I interviewed the pastors at St. Paul's. I interviewed a lot of people in the neighborhood. I interviewed some of the city leaders. This was the mid-90s, and a lot of tension in the neighborhood about St. Paul's and having torn down houses and made parking lots in the neighborhood. And so when we moved here, 7 or 8 years later, I could never have imagined that this was a church that I would go to. I didn't form a favorable opinion of St. Paul's at that point in time, granted, based on, one situation, data point. But one of the things that just has impressed me with St. Paul's is its continued love of the neighborhood and outreach to the neighborhood. And I just have felt like over the years, St. Paul's has really built this really good, solid relationship with the Wellington Heights neighborhood. I know that history is still out there, though. I just can't, to me, in good conscience, have St. Paul's or not advocate for St. Paul's not tearing down another property and sort of reigniting that history and that tension with the neighborhood. I think this is just being a really good steward of both the history of the neighborhood that we're in and our missional priorities.
Holly, I'm going to come to Bob, then I'll come to you.
One of the questions I would have is, little PR, if part of our issue is developing a relationship and showing that we want to do something for the neighborhood, how are we going to label this building? Is it going to be St. Paul's, Matthew 27? When I look at the sign outside, what am I going to see?
Could I address that to the potential owner of that home? Or the director of the organization who would own that?
Yeah, I think we would be flexible in working with the congregation to figure out, whether that's a co-branding or how the story gets told. We certainly see this as something that St. Paul's is trying to do positively for the neighborhood and would want to be part of telling that story and getting it out there.
Sorry to put you on. Holly, I saw your hand.
This is the project that has got me the most excited. I do think it's valuable in the community and how the feelings throughout history have felt about how St. Paul's interacts with Wellington Heights. And this would be a stand to say, we care about Wellington Heights. We value and we love the neighborhood we in. And I think that is a higher value than what the cost would be. And I think it's a very positive role.
I agree with the people who are in favor of this project. It moved me when Kathy talked about it, and I've heard it many times. So thank you for your passion. And also, we should learn our lesson from the 90s, don't you think?
Okay. I'm going to try to move us along, I think. It's an interesting project. Steve is correct. We did get a number from the demo contractor if we wanted to demo it, hydro seed it. He gave us a number of $30,000, which would take a process going through the city to do that, but you'd probably get there. And of course, there'd be probably some other improvements, so you could add some more money to that. So those are two options. We really need your feedback on it. It would be kind of really neat to have an immigrant transitional house. So, okay, there's a lot of stuff today, but we're doing pretty good on time. The second item under property initiatives is what we call the 2nd Avenue parking lot. not the one back here, but the one that's between 14th and 15th Street. So could we go to the next slide? You can kind of see where the church is, and you can see the large 14th Street parking lot that doesn't get used that much anymore unless there's a big event here. And then there's this lot. This is the lot I'm talking about, the one in yellow. It does not get used hardly at all, really, right, frankly. Next slide. This is what it looks like at ground level. It's got these large arborvitae's that either need to be trimmed or taken out. There's a fence behind it, and there's actually a fence on both sides that's starting to fail. In fact, some of the trustees took out a chunk of it this past week because the city told us we had to. It has to get seal coated from time to time. It has to get snow plowed. So there's costs associated with it, and we don't use it. So the trustees, it came up in the trustees, why don't we sell the lot? And so the best idea that I thought bubbled up was, why don't we go to Habitat for Humanity and ask if we can sell it to them so that they could build a Habitat house at this location. So we did that, and Habitat has come back, and what they said was they typically, a lot of times they get lots for $1. Somebody, particularly businesses, will sell them lots for $1. If they buy a lot, they typically pay somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 for that lot. They took a look at this lot because it's paved and said it would take about $23,000. They had a contractor look at it. It would take about $23,000 to make this a build-ready lot. So they said, therefore, they really couldn't afford to buy the lot. So really our option, if we want to work with Habitat for Humanity, is to sell them the lot for $1, and we would then know that it would turn into be a good neighbor type house. The other option is to try to sell it on the open market, which we could do. We actually had Robin Tucker do a very cursory analysis of that. I don't think Robin's here today, so I won't try to mischaracterize him. He took a look and said he didn't really find actual comparables in the Wellington Heights neighborhood, but he found enough information that he thought we could sell it for somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, probably closer to the 10. If we did that, there would be a little money in the coffers, but we would really have no control of what happens there. So those are the two options at this point. Another option is to keep it, of course. So we'd kind of like your feedback on how you feel about that. Yes?
Can the money from the sale, can that be used towards other capital campaign projects?
Sure it could. and keep in mind, on all these property projects, the selling to Matthew 25, selling to Habitat, or to anybody, this would require a church conference to approve that, correct?
You might notice that I'm worried about public relations for St. Paul's. One of them would be selling something like this. Oh, they're selling off their property. However, they're building this other one on the other side. What's going on here? I'm just talking about hanging on to it for a while, because what a good PR if we could make Habitat or something for that lot. Thank you.
Good comment. Brad?
Wait.
You can run.
So I'm assuming if we sold it to Habitat for $1, whatever, the church would need to spend the $23,000 to remove the, no?
No, they would do that. Of course, we haven't got we haven't got to that point, but I did spend about an hour with the executive director about a week ago doing a tour of Habitat houses. And at the conclusion of it, I asked her that question: if St. Paul's were to sell it to you for $1, would you be interested? And she said we probably would.
What's the savings like annually to get rid of that? From insurance, is there less, or property tax, is there less? I mean, what would our savings be?
Yeah, great question, and I don't think we know the answer to that. We didn't look into that. I certainly snow removal, and then like every 4 or 5 years you got to seal coat it. We got the fence to deal with. I'm not even sure why we have a fence in the first place, but we have one.
Just help me visualize this. We're talking about from the alley to 2nd Avenue, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Not the 14th Street parking lot.
No, thank you.
Right.
Some of us used to park in it before this was done. Nobody parks there now. That was also the house that was the problem in the 90s. I think Habitat's a really awesome idea.
One more question here, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Have you explored the possibility of using that as a neighborhood recreation area, a park, skate park, something of that nature? Pickleball court.
No, we didn't, but in our master plan from 5 or 6 years ago, no, 6 or 7 years ago now, the master plan would have been probably 8 years ago. Phase 2 was to build a recreation center on the 14th Street parking lot, and then that lot was going to be the actual parking. That didn't become feasible for us, and now the Boys and Girls Club are building something relatively close. Washington Park, is that where it's at? Yeah, so it's close to the neighborhood, so that kind of makes that, doing that project unfeasible or not needed. But yeah, put a basketball court there. Interesting idea. Again, make your comments about how you feel about that, because this is going to give us an indication of where to take this next steps. The final thing on the list is the parsonage. That's another piece of property that we own. And so I'm going to ask Pastor Jonathan to come and talk about the parsonage.
Yeah. I don't think I get to have any part of the wrap-up comments, so I can't end without making sort of my summary of this day, which is to say, it's really encouraging to me as a pastor to know that trustees are working with ministry areas and putting before you things worth considering for the sake of mission. If we decide no on any one of these things, we've already succeeded in the fact that what has happened up to this point has happened. So can we show a little appreciation for all of our trustees for sending to serve, for our worship team, and those who've contributed in these conversations. Now to the parsonage. During the 8+ years that I've been appointed here, our family has lived in the church parsonage at 2122 Country Club Parkway, southeast here in Cedar Rapids. However, with the support of the trustees and church council, we would like to request permission to sell this property and make different provisions for clergy housing for your lead pastor. For a bit more context, the lead pastor of St. Paul's has not lived in a church-owned parsonage for the last 30+ years. They've all had housing allowances in that time, and we currently have a housing allowance for Pastor Daniel. He and his family have their own housing arrangement, and our half-time associate Pastor Ryan does not receive any housing allowance or parsonage at this time. The reasons for requesting this change: the parsonage will require some expensive repairs in the not-so-distant future, including an air conditioner that's 20+ years old, a furnace that's 20+ years old, windows that have not held the draft out quite as well after the derecho. These repairs are not part of our budget. That is not to say trustees have not taken good care of the place. I do want to be clear about that, though. Additionally, decreasing our property footprint would allow St. Paul's to focus our financial resources on keeping the historic aging sanctuary and church building in good shape. It would allow our trustees to focus more of their energy on these shared spaces as well. Furthermore, with the likelihood of us staying for a bit longer, 10 years of lead pastors is certainly longer than 10 years of associate pastors. Purchasing a home would be beneficial to our family, too. So I'm always inclined to pursue decisions that entail benefit for everyone involved, and as far as I can tell, this is part of that. However, the main reason for all of this is ultimately a missional reason. I know that St. Paul's can develop deeper relationships around the church if your lead pastor and family live closer to it, and if our neighbors are in the neighborhood of the church. Our friends at Wellington Heights Community Church, Pastors Keon and Stephanie, are my closest and clearest example of the value of a pastor living in the neighborhood where they serve. Proximity matters. Matthew 25 teaches us that. Our associate pastor knows that well. We are learning. So therefore, our family's desire, as much as it would be possible, would be to purchase a home within walking distance of the church. Now, that is especially important to me in the conversations that we've heard here today. But in 2022, we took a congregational assessment tool, and the thing that stuck out the clearest to me out of all the things that it said about St. Paul's is that this is a church that has an above average interest in the neighborhood where the church is located. Now, just by way of survey, how many people live in this neighborhood? 1, 2, 3. A few. There's something incredible there that is an opportunity for us. That is a bit of a vacuum that we can fill in. That's what we're hoping to do with this. One of the reasons that I was appointed to this position, at least the case I tried to make in my request to our bishop, was the partnerships and relationships that I've been able to develop with community partners in Wellington Heights. This would only strengthen, build upon, and expand that work. So, to note where we are in the process of all of this, the trustees heard this proposal from me. They approved it, and with the desire to move it forward. It went to church council, and they approved the request of a charge conference to make this happen. As Dale said, we need permission from the bishop for these sorts of things to happen. That request was then forwarded on to the District Building and Locations Committee, and they voted 4 out of 4 votes yes to grant permission for this request. Now, that doesn't mean we have permission yet. What they do is they move it on to the bishop, who then will ultimately grant us permission to have a charge conference. That was way more Methodist polity than anyone probably cared to hear. If the bishop grants it, we would then have a charge conference to approve this decision. If approved, if we as a charge conference say, yes, we want to go forward with this, then the time frame that I think this makes sense happening in is the parsonage would be prepared and we would seek a new home in the first quarter of 2024 or early second quarter of 2024. To address a couple of potential questions around all of this, according to Greg Cooper, who is the chair of the District Building and Locations Committee, he's in Cedar Falls, he assured me that funds from selling the parsonage could be used to create an endowed fund that could cover the housing allowance, which by our Iowa Conference policy right now is $18,500 a year for a housing allowance if there's not a parsonage. So those funds from the sales of the parsonage could be used to cover that, so it would not be an additional burden on our budget. If there were funds beyond that, they would need to be used for capital projects for the church. So I appreciate your consideration of this, and I don't know if you have questions. I guess I'll be the rover. So. Yeah.
This is as much a comment as a question. I'm super excited to see this happening. I think it says a lot about you, Jonathan and Stephanie and Charles, that you're wanting to live in the community. As people that did that when Carla and I moved to town, we know that it made a difference, kind of raising our kids in the core of the city. The second thing I would say is I'm a third-generation pastor. I lived in parsonages the entire time I was growing up. When I moved to Cedar Rapids, I thought I would for sure be living in a parsonage, and instead, Lovely Lane had a housing allowance. It allowed Carla and I to pick our own location, to put down deep roots, to invest, and to have a place to actually live when we retire, which my grandparents and parents didn't have. And so I think it's a huge gift to the family to be able to do that. So that's great to hear.
Come over to Jerry.
Many of you know that I spent some time as a district superintendent, and one of the questions asked when by a pastor coming to a church in my district is, what's the parsonage like? I've been in this parsonage. It's nice and big, but there's no, it absolutely is not accessible. There's no bedroom on the main floor. It doesn't meet conference standards in so many ways and can't be adapted to make it. So I think that's one reason. And then just reflecting over my history, living in seven different parsonages over my career, none of them is still a parsonage. For one reason or another, the church has decided to move on.
Tom. Got pastors invested in this conversation.
I would second what Clint said, but my comment would be parsonages make sense in small communities where it is hard to sell property. In Cedar Rapids with the real estate market, everything points to our pastors should have the option of having their own home.
It appears to me that we're planning on this process so Jonathan can walk back and forth just doing the microphones.
Yeah. I can count on
I
you
needed
to
it.
have a
That's
little
okay.
joke.
I'll give a little history, and hopefully people older than me can correct me if I'm not right. But we did have a Wellington Heights parsonage when I was a kid. Jim Regal, if you remember him, and his 4 kids, I think. A lot of kids anyway, 2 of them adopted, lived in, I think, the 1600 block of 3rd Avenue Southeast. If I tried real hard, I could walk around there and try to figure out which one it is, because I know I've been in it. And yes, maybe the neighborhood has changed a little bit since then, but I really applaud Pastor Jonathan's reasons for wanting that. And that's kind of the opposite of what I heard from the senior pastor when I was in grade school. I was too young to even pay attention to it at the time, but what I'm told is that the wife of this prospective senior pastor looked at whatever our senior pastor house was at the time and was told it was totally unacceptable. And that's when they bought the Country Club Parkway house, because it had great status for a church that needed to have great status. I found that out when I was a teenager, and as a teenager, of course, I was really opposed to it, and I was really mad about that and everything. But that also gives you a good reason why you should let pastors choose where they want to live, because maybe somebody finds that it's really important to have status. I hope they don't come to this church. Maybe somebody like Pastor Jonathan becomes our senior pastor, and I can be very, very proud of that.
Well, that's a good note.
One more, Pastor.
One more.
As a pastor for 42 years, 30 of them in Iowa Annual Conference, I have served churches mostly in small towns where it was important to keep the parsonage for the exact reason that's been pointed out here. And but in this case, it's important for this pastor to be associated with his community.
I don't think this one's on. So I'll take this one maybe. Thanks for all the comments, everybody, and thanks for attending. This is a really great attendance. We really needed that. We need your comments. I wonder where a good place to, maybe as you go out the door, you could, whatever door you go out, you could leave them, because we need those. Again, thanks for all the presenters. I think it was good to have the mission, or the committees actually make the presentations. And Nathan, thank you so much for you and your son joining us today, and we look forward to continue working with you. So everybody have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next Sunday.